Welcome to the premiere edition of Muscle Serpents University, sponsored by Species Nutrition and Cutting Edge Herp. I'm your host, Dave Palumbo, and I'm here with my co-host and author of The Complete Boa Constrictor, Vin Russo. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Muscles and snakes, don't that just go together perfectly?
They go together great.
Vin, I like to do educational shows because I think a lot of people don't know, how to do things. And in the reptile industry, you hear so many crazy different methodologies of how to get things done. I think this show is going to be a great learning experience, and that's why I call it university, for people to understand how to best take care of their snakes.
Right.
And, one of the topics that I know have a real irking in your brain is about boa constrictors. I mean, you are the foremost expert. You wrote the book, The Complete Boa Constrictor. How long did that book take you, by the way, to write?
To write, it took a few years. It definitely took a few years. There's photographs in that book that are probably 30 years old. So I started taking pictures in the past thinking, well, maybe I can use these for something I'll put together one day, maybe a pamphlet or a booklet, and it turned into a book.
So you really, in your mind, knew that these photos might come in handy.
I had in the back of my mind that there was so much of a lack of knowledge of boa constrictors that when I started compiling information, I figured, maybe I should save this in a safe place to eventually put together into a book or a pamphlet, and, the rest was history from there.
Now, a lot of people, when they hear the word boa constrictor, they think of these massive, giant snakes, and they just say to themselves, I don't want to have them because these are dangerous. They're going to kill me. They're poisonous. Explain, number one, what a boa constrictor is, the one that, most people, would picture as the typical prototype boa constrictor, and then explain to us a little bit about the different variations.
Well, there's 9 subspecies of boa constrictors, so everybody thinks that boas get giant and they're these huge things because a lot of times they mistake them for pythons. A lot of people don't know the difference.
Right. And how can you tell the difference? Is there a way, one distinguishing factor you can say that's definitely a boa, that's definitely a python?
There is one. The pythons do have sensory pits in their
heat pits.
Top of their mouth, right? The boas don't have them in the top of their mouth, so
that instantly tells you.
Right away you could tell it's a boa, okay? And the boas have a little bit of a bigger head and a little thicker body than a python's, a little more longer and more slender. And boas are live bearers, pythons are egg layers.
Right. And boas are mostly found in North and South America, right?
Well, boas, yeah, they're from mostly Central and South America, and there are no pythons in the New World, so to speak.
Right.
Pythons are Old World, which is Africa.
Now, when we talk about size of boa constrictor, what is the big boa constrictor? What species is that? The big one that we see?
The biggest boas that you would most likely see would be South American boa constrictor, which come from the Amazon basin. The Amazon basin creatures are...
That's in Brazil, mostly.
Well, you've got... The Amazon basin could be Ecuador, Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Suriname, Guyana. Those boas do get bigger, but they don't get extraordinarily big.
What's big?
I would say a big one, meaning a really big one, would be somewhere around 9 to 10 feet. It's rare that you see a boa much bigger than that.
And how thick? Show me with your hands, like how thick.
I would say a big...
Like a tree, small tree?
A big adult would be maybe that thick.
Okay. So that's a big snake for most people, but it's certainly not a reticulated python or a Burmese python.
Right. They can get 20, 30 feet.
And be this thick, yeah.
Right.
Now, of the different subspecies you said that there are some that remain small. These are called the dwarf boas, or they're kind of known as the dwarf boas, generically speaking. How big do those get?
Genetically speaking, they are much smaller. They've evolved on little islands or in very genetically isolated caverns and riparian canyons, and they've evolved to eat less meals every year and stay smaller. So I brought a couple here if you'd like for me to take them.
Yeah, we're going to take them out. I just want to explain to some people, because evolutionarily speaking, all the continents, theoretically were connected at one point. So everything kind of came from the same place, so we think.
Right. Well, we can go through that too. All boas evolved in South America from what we would call the boa constrictor. That was the dominant race, so to speak, okay? And as time went on and evolution occurred, these snakes traveled into different places. Now, South America was not connected to North America,
prior to that.
Thousands of years ago. So what had happened was, as ocean levels came down and lowered, a land bridge formed between South America and North America, and that's Central America. And the boas traveled north into this land bridge, so to speak, and they also went into the little islands around this land bridge. And they evolved in places where there may have been a lot less food than there was in South America.
Right.
The seasonalities were different, a little harsher environments.
Would that mean like the bigger ones wouldn't survive as well?
Right, a larger snake could not survive, correct. It would require more meals. So these snakes evolved requiring less meals and less sustenance to keep themselves alive and to reproduce.
What about temperature requirements? Did they change? Obviously, as you move north, usually the temperatures get a little cooler, I would think.
Not necessarily. In the tropics, the temperatures are not much cooler. Now, if you go very far north, say, for example, into Mexico, where there are some boas too, some of the higher altitudes in Mexico are cooler. But again, they're not that cold, considering that boas don't really like the cold.
Right.
I would say the coldest they would get there would be high 50s, low 60s, temperatures like that.
Okay. Now, also, there were different, I guess you could say morphologies of these snakes. They look different, too. I mean, why do you think they evolved that way? To camouflage themselves, or is there any theories on that?
Well, exactly. They've all evolved in their own little niche, their own little place where they may have, for example, the K-boas that live on islands that are sandy and have a lot of gray matter on the ground. They've evolved to be more camouflaged with their environment, so they are grayer snakes. Some people call them anerythristic, but they really aren't, because there are little pink undertones in them.
Anerythristic meaning lacking red pigment.
Lacking red, exactly.
Now, a lot of morphs or different, colorful, as they call them, paint jobs in our industry have evolved from some of these weird color variations in the different locality boas.
Sure. And
I know you've probably exploited several of those to make some interesting color variations. Why don't you show us some of the base, snakes that exist geographically, and then we can kind of maybe you can tell us about some of the interesting ones that you've made from these snakes. What's this first one we're gonna?
The first one is Hog Island Boa. Hog Island is an island off the coast of Honduras, and this was the first boa that people saw in the pet trade as an island boa.
Okay. When did that reach the pet trade?
Those started getting into the pet trade in the 80s, in the mid to early 80s. Now, what's amazing about these snakes is this is an adult male.
That's full grown?
This is a full-grown male.
That could breed?
This male breeds and has had babies. So a female would be maybe about double this thickness and a little longer. The females are a little bit bigger. But this was the first, colorful, odd-looking island-type snake.
And what kind of patterning would you call this?
Speckled in a way. Some of them are speckless. Now, through captive breeding and multiple generations of selective breeding, we've gotten some to be speckless.
So you've gotten patternless boas from this?
From this same bloodline. Now, what's amazing is it took these snakes thousands of years to look this cryptic on their island, but it took just a few generations of selective breeding to change that. So it goes
amazing.
to show you what we can do in captivity.
Now how heavy would this snake be, would you say?
This snake is maybe... I would say maybe a pound or two.
Gotcha. Now, all boas have these saddles. I don't know if you can see if you zoom in here. And what I know you're a big scale counter. Explain what that means when you count scales.
Well, taxonomically speaking, in the past, scale counting was done to recognize different subspecies of snakes. Now, this snake is not recognized as a subspecies because it is virtually almost identical to the snakes from the mainland of Honduras.
Okay.
So now thousands of years ago, or maybe even hundreds of thousands of years ago, snakes may have rafted or swam or may even have been on a higher point, and then the ocean levels changed and they were isolated on the Hog Islands, and they became genetically isolated and they looked a little different. So
that's pretty much the way it goes, so to speak. Now, let's look at the tails of these, because all boa constrictors have this, I don't know, would you call it a red tail? Or what would be the patterning you call these tails on boas? Because they all have the same pattern.
Again, a lot of people think of red tail, and they think of red tail boa. The red tail boa is the true constrictor or the South American snake.
Right.
So now these evolved from these South American true red tails. So they have remnants of the red or orange in the tail.
Right.
But they're not technically true red tails.
Gotcha. So they're not. This is not. Would not be considered a red-tailed boa. What is the exact species and subspecies?
Boa constrictor imperator.
Imperator, which is what most of them seem to be.
Right. Everything from Central America. Most things from Central America. Most boas from Central America are boa constrictor.
So this is from Hog Island, off of Honduras.
Now, taxonomically speaking, again through DNA work, some herpetologists have been finding out how closely related these snakes really are to their mainland cousins, and some of them are pretty far apart as far as genetics and as far as DNA sequencing.
Now, you don't believe in crossbreeding these. You like to keep these localities separated, whereas I know a lot of other boa breeders will crossbreed to try to get colors from this to here. Why don't you like to crossbreed?
You know, the way I look at it is Mother Nature created this snake and made it look as beautiful as it is, and for me to mess that up is sacrilegious in a way.
Gotcha.
There are some breeders that have bred things into the Hog Island boas, and they call them sunset boas.
Okay.
They bred hypos into them.
Hypo meaning hypomelanistic?
Hypomelanistic, which is lacking black. Those are nice in their own right. I'm not going to say that they're not. And the good thing is the people that have done those breedings have called them sunset boas. They don't call them a Hog Island cross.
Gotcha. So at least they're not trying to confuse people.
So they're making a new
All right.
race.
Let's see what else we got over here. Let's see if my assistant over there can get us the next snake. What's so amazing is that these locality boas, which are really not that far apart, do look so much different that it's amazing. You know, so I'm just like flabbergasted how the patterning's changed so much.
Now, this particular boa here came from an island called Crawl Cay.
And what's Crawl Cay?
Crawl Cay is a small cay. Cays are small islands with lagoons on them off the coast of.
I read your book, and
Central
I thought you said
America.
they're pronounced keys.
Well, both are correct.
I read.
Yes,
I'm good, right?
Both are correct.
Okay.
So this particular animal is from Crawl Cay or Crawl Key. I say Cay because a lot of people.
It looks like K. It's CAY.
Right.
Yeah.
And this particular snake is a direct descendant of an animal that was captured directly on the island.
Oh, really? So this is a direct. What generation? First generation?
This is first generation.
Wow. And this is full grown as well?
This is a full-grown male. Yeah.
Wow.
Now these are very small snakes too. Females will breed and give birth at around 2 pounds.
Really?
So
and they're very. I mean, I've never touched the snake before. These snakes are pretty nice. They don't seem to have bad temperaments or anything like that.
They're calm shoulder pets for sure.
And this probably doesn't get handled a whole lot because you breed them.
As a breeder, I don't handle them much at all.
Now I noticed, like when I look at this snake and I turn him over, I see he's got a lot of red in him.
Right.
And pinkish tones. What is that from? Is that just a locality thing, or does this mean something? Is this like a special like indicator?
No, that's just part of their colors. Like I was saying before, some people thought that they were anerythristic, lacking red, but they really aren't because they do have some
pink,
red
yeah.
and some pink on them.
Now, what could you do with a snake like this to try to improve it?
What I've done is I've selectively bred snakes with particular looks and traits that I like. For example, I like how this snake looks very cryptic. You can put this snake down on the ground on an island, and it'll literally disappear in the leaf litter, in the palmetto leaf litter. That's what I like about it. I try to keep them to look exactly what they are. Now, it's hard to change these snakes, and I'll tell you why. These snakes have such a small gene pool from evolving on an island with hardly any other like themselves, that they all are almost carbon copies of each other.
Right.
Okay, so there's not much deviation. I've seen some deviation in these, but very little. It's either a shade of darkness or lightness, but usually the patterns are about the same. There might be some striping.
Are there hypomelanistic versions of these?
I wouldn't call them hypomelanistic. I produce some that are lighter, extremely lighter.
But it's allelic.
But I think it's just just variation.
Yeah.
Polygenic variation.
Now, what about albinism? We do see in certain species of boa that there are albinos. Would these have any? Have there been any found?
No.
Okay.
Like I said, the gene pool is so small. One biologist who went to this particular island claims that there may be as little as only 8 snakes left on the island.
Wow, that little, huh?
Right.
Now, just to give people an idea of how valuable some of these snakes are, what would a snake like this cost?
They're valuable in that there's not a lot of them around, but a pair of babies of this exact race are $700.
Okay, I mean it's not cheap, but it's not exorbitant.
Yeah.
What if spontaneously you went into your hatchery and you saw an albino version of this pop out? What would it be worth?
It would be worth a lot of money because number one, it would be a smaller race of albino. Right. It would be something that's very small. So it would be marketable, and people would want it because it stays small.
Right, and then obviously you'd have to breed that into the rest of them. That would take several years, but obviously it would be a very valuable snake.
Right, it would be. But the chances of that occurring are not very
less
good.
likely. Is what you're saying. I got you. All right, let's see what our next snake is here. Let's get our assistant Amanda there. Hand that one over.
Now this is called a Corn Island Boa.
And where's
Corn
Corn?
Island is off the coast of Nicaragua. There's 2 islands there. Isla de Mays.
It sounds like something from Jurassic Park.
Corn Island, Isla del Mays Pequeño and Isla de Mays Grande. These particular snakes came into the country in the mid-90s from a single litter or 2 of snakes.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, how did people get a hold of like a single litter? Like when one snake comes in the country, how does someone like you get a hold of these things?
Well, what had happened was, I think it was 1994 or 5, a dealer in Florida. A dealer in Florida had brought in, like I said, it was either 1 or 2 litters. We couldn't tell, but based on how many babies they have, it was probably 2 litters. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Nicaragua was open to export. So somebody went to the island, found either a gravid snake or 2. They had given birth in a wholesale facility, and then they were in the pet trade. So I knew the dealer in Florida, and I ended up buying a few of them.
Wow, so these are very, very rare then.
Right, and another friend of mine, Gus Renfro, had bought some, and he was the first guy to breed them in captivity.
Now, let's talk about breeding for a minute. Are the dwarf boas difficult to breed? I know you're going to say nothing's difficult to breed, but for the average, novice.
They require more seasonality, which
means what?
A little harder to duplicate. Having a very specific or particular dry season, and then maybe a specific rainier season or more humidity season.
Yeah, will you duplicate that in your?
I do. I duplicate a feeding season. I duplicate a non-feeding season. I duplicate a wet season, a dry season. And there's multiple compensating factors that go into effect to get the snakes to breed.
How old will this snake have to be before it can breed? Because a lot of people would probably want to buy like a little snake and breed it in a year. It's not like a hamster or anything.
No,
like that.
they would take 3 to 4 years to be sexually mature, and that's about minimum.
What about males and females? About comparable, the same?
Males may breed a little younger.
Mm-hmm. And how many babies? Now these alive bears, like you mentioned earlier, how many babies will these things have?
10 to 12.
Okay,
babies.
So that's a nice litter.
Yeah, yeah.
And what kind of morphs have been bred into this line, if there are any? Because it seems very rare.
None. If anything, I've been trying to breed these for more red.
Right.
As you can see, there is some red, especially underneath. So other than that, and there's two bloodlines now because another group of them came into the country a little later. And they both look very similar, but one has more of like a greenish look to it. If you can see that almost in this snake too. Mm-hmm. So as far as morphs, not really, but trying to get the more red out of them is what I've been working on.
Is it difficult because there's so few of them to
exactly.
deal with?
They're
all inbred, right? Yeah.
Right. And as far as inbreeding, that topic comes up a lot too. But I believe that these animals that evolved on islands, who are genetically isolated, have very little inbreeding depression because Mother Nature, over the last few thousand years, weeded out the bad traits. Right. So now in captivity, you can reverse that. But that's why I like to breed, for particular colors or particular looks. I don't try to line breed as much. I try to outbreed as much as I can, or whatever little bit I can do, to try and keep it going. But I've had no problems as far as breeding siblings to each other with these snakes.
Now that everyone is excited about dwarf boas and they realize, hey, these are great pets. They're not going to get huge. This is certainly manageable. I mean, what would you could keep this in, a 20-gallon aquarium maybe?
20 long, sure.
Yeah. I mean, probably its whole life as a pet. And what would something like this eat every week?
It would eat a small to medium rat or a large mouse once every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. And that's it?
That's it.
Every 2 weeks? That's nothing?
Every 2 weeks, yeah.
And they'll probably poop once every month or so, right?
Yeah, there's not a lot of care required.
And you just put fresh water in there and it's easy to go. Now, because these are kind of rarer, where would someone get something like this? Like if I wanted to buy this, would I be able to go to a pet store and buy this? Or
you'd have to go to cuttingedgeherb.com.
There you go. All right, there's your plug. Unfortunately, you don't really sell online. They'd have to contact you and ask you.
People can go to my website, sure. There's a few other breeders that do breed these. It's not like I'm the only one. There's a few reputable breeders that have kept them pure and worked on specifically these locality type boas. So finding somebody in your area, or you can email, myself, or go to my website.
Your Facebook page too, you kind of put the snakes that you have up for sale on there as well.
Sure,
Cutting Edge Herb.
sure.
Now, interestingly, obviously, I know how business works. Now, some snake breeder out there is going to look at this snake and say, "This is a really cool snake. It's small. It's marketable. We got to get some colors into this thing." And they start breeding outside boas into this,
Right.
imperatas, that are bigger snakes. And all of a sudden, we got reds and light colors, but now the snake's not going to be a dwarf boa anymore.
Right.
It's more than likely he's going to get bigger,
A
right?
friend of mine once said you can take a glass of lemonade and a glass of fruit punch and mix them together, and you're never going to get fruit punch or lemonade ever again.
Right.
So it's the same thing with snakes. Once you mix them, match them with other genetics, you're gone. Another race of snake. That's why I try to keep things pure. To me, it's a waste of time to breed another snake into this, and I'll tell you why. Number one, the crosses you make may not look as good as this. They may look better. Most likely they won't look as good, because when you do start mixing and matching things, you kind of dilute the water, so to speak. So the genetic crosses would be worthless in a way, because they are inferior. You can't use them in a breeding project to make more Corn Island boas.
Right.
So keeping them pure to me is far more worth the while. And again, Mother Nature spent thousands of years making the snake look like this. Who am I to mess it up?
Well, Vinny, thank you very much for filling us in on dwarf boas. That does it for the premiere edition of Muscle Serpents University. I'm Dave Palumbo, saying see you next week.